All right, before we get into connecting all of the clusters to their control objects and the control objects together into an organized system, let's talk about the different type of constraints that we're going to use. We're going to use a point constraint, a parenting, and then a parent constraint. So this is lesson 8 constraint demo. I've got just a little simple file set up here that you can use to follow along. We're going to talk about quickly a point constraint. In this situation, you notice if I move this sphere around, okay, the master object, what's called a slave object, very similar to hard drives. You have a master hard drive and a slave hard drive. It moves independent, okay, and you notice where its pivot point is. It's right here in the center, the same as this object's pivot point. Now, the way we create this constraint is you select the master object, shift select the slave object, and you'll go to constraint point. Now, what happens is the slave object's pivot point jumps to where the master object's pivot point is. So now, the only relationship that these two share, if we look in the outliner, this object and this object have no other relationship than a constraint that's connecting them together. But when I move the master, the slave will automatically move. Now, you have to be careful because it looks like you can pick it up and move it, but the minute you move the master, it will snap back. Okay, so the system just needs to update. Now, this only works with translates. If I select this blue, this torus here, this purple object, you notice the translate channels are turned blue. That's saying that it's connected with a constraint. So I can do a rotate, okay, and this object would not care what's happening to it. Okay, so it does not match with rotate. Okay, now let's talk about parenting. The parenting, you work in the opposite direction. You pick the child first, then you pick the parent. Hit P or go up here to Edit, Parent. Now, you notice the pivot point did not move. Everything stays as is. However, we now have a relationship set up. Okay, the child is part of this parent object. So what happens is if I move the parent, the child moves. If I rotate the parent, the child rotates. If I scale, okay, so everything is connected and filtered down to the child. But just like in real life, just because the parent moves somewhere, the child can then run around on their own, okay, independent of the parent. So that's kind of a nice little setup. So this allows the parent to move all of the objects, but then the children to move independently. It's just a nice organization. All right. In Maya, there's also a constraint called parent constraint, which is kind of a neat hybrid between parenting and constraining. So what we'll do is we'll select this the same way we do regular constraints, master-slave relationship. Okay, we'll go to constraint, parent, and you'll notice now that the translate and rotates are connected automatically. So again, if I pick this up and move it, unlike the point constraint, the pivot point for this guy didn't jump. Okay, so it leaves the objects where they are, but then connects them, let's see if I rotate, just like a regular parent relationship. Okay, however, there is a constraint involved, so I can animate this object going from one object being constrained to it to another, which is very nice. It gives me the ability to turn it off if I want, so to speak. All right, so that's how we're going to do this. So let's get into our controls now. I'll open up the file here, which is Lesson 8, Constraining Controls. If you're not following along, if you want to just open this file. All right, let's talk about what we have here. We have each of these clusters that we want to follow along when we select this, let's say this back control. When I select it, I essentially want to select this cluster so I can move it. All right. So the relationship that we're going to set up is we'll select the back control, shift select the cluster, we'll go to constraint, point. So now if I move this back control, you notice it moves the cluster. So that's good. We like that. All right. And as I get these done, I'm going to drop them into their own layer. So I'll go ahead and create one more layer, and this will be called Don't Touch. Okay, we'll save that. And I'm going to turn the visibility off. So as I add objects to this, I can right-click, add selected objects, and they hide. Okay, We're going to do the same with this chest control here. We're going to select this cluster. I'm sorry, select the chest control, shift select the cluster chest, and we'll go to constraint, point. Okay, test it. All right, that looks good. And we'll add the cluster to this object. All right, we're going to do the same here with this abs control. So we'll select the abs control, the cluster, constraint, point, hide the cluster. Okay, and then we'll test. Looks good. Now this is where it starts to get a little bit tricky. Okay, we want this hip control to be in charge of this cluster hip, so we'll do that. Okay, point constraint. Add the cluster to our don't touch layer. Okay, let's test it. Very good. Hip sway works good. All right, so those are the constraints. Now, let's talk about some parenting here. Notice we haven't done anything with this hip control. Hip control is going to be a major control, so we're going to come back and work with it. All right. When I move the hips, I also want to move the abs. Okay. So we'll select the abs, select the hip control, hit P to parent. Okay, so now let's see this. All right, that looks good. I want to take the hip sway control, shift select the hip control, hit P to parent. Okay, so now the whole bottom half should move. All right, that looks good. All right, we're going to take this upper body control here, this chest control, shift select on this hip control, hit P for parent. Okay, now my upper body should start moving. Good. And we're going to do the same with the back. Take the back, add it to the hip control, hit P to parent. So now that looks really good. The last thing that I want to do is I want to take the hip control right here, and I want to shift select this joint, this root joint, and there I want to do a parent constraint because I don't want to move the pivot points. So I'll go to constraint, parent. Now, what does this do for me? Well, it gives me the ability to select my hip control, okay, grab that, and now pick up my body, move it. I can pick up my hips. I've got control on my abs. I've got control on my chest bone area and my back. So a lot of great controls here. Let me undo back to my start position. All built in very quickly and very easily. Everything is labeled and adjusted accordingly. So just a quick review here. We've got the cluster, the neck cluster and this back control connected, the chest cluster and the chest control, the abs cluster and the ab control, the hip cluster and the hip sway control, and then everything is parented to the hip control, and then the hip control and the root joint are parent constrained. All right. The last little bit that I want to do is connect the rotate Y of this little control here to this IK handle. See, the IK handle has this twist attribute, which will allow us to adjust the chest. So let's connect that together. All right, we're going to use the connection editor for that. So we'll go to Window, General Editors, Connection Editor. And the first time you use the connection editor, it's kind of a scary looking thing. Okay, let me just minimize this so it's a little bit easier to see. All right, I have the chest control selected, so I'll hit reload left. There this is. And then I'm going to carefully select the IK handle and hit reload right. So what I want to do is connect the rotate Y. Okay, I'll just scroll down here until I find rotate. Open this up and find rotate Y. To over here, I want to connect that to the twist. So what that means is any value that I put into here will be directly connected into this attribute. Okay? And you notice once you click on them and connect them, they become italicized. So now watch what happens. Before, when I rotated this object, nothing would happen. Now I have the ability to take and rotate this, and you notice it rotates my head and neck area. Now, there's a problem here. We're missing one joint, so I want to show you in another lesson how to break this, add a joint, and fix things like this when you run into those problems through your process. But that is essentially building the upper body controls for the characters that you've seen on our website and other kits that are animated. This is Delano's standard rig setup for building animated characters.